Women for Women podcast.
پادکست زنان برای زنان.
ښځو لپاره د ښځو پودکاسټ.
Hello and welcome, dear listeners. I'm Nazifa Jalali, and you're listening to the Women for Women podcast. This is a space where women share their own stories in their own voices, stories of courage, resilience, and hope. In this podcast, you'll hear from women who have faced discrimination, threats, torture, and many difficult challenges, yet continue to stand strong and move forward. Every episode is a reminder that behind every struggle is a woman who choose courage over fear and hope over silence. Welcome to another episode of Women for Women podcast, a platform where we bring forward the voices, experience, and stories of women. Today, we are honored to have with Ms. Meetra Qutb, a human rights advocate based in London, who has been working to support and amplify the voices of Afghan women. Through her work and engagement with Afghan communities, Mitra has witnessed the challenges, struggles, and resilience of women navigating one of the most difficult periods in Afghanistan's recent story. In today's conversation, we will explore her journey, her connections with Afghanistan from abroad, the realities faced by Afghan women, and the importance of advocacy and solidarity. Mitra, welcome to Women for Women podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Hi Nazifa. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for joining us. Could you briefly introduce yourself and tell us about your journey to where you are today in London?
Of course. So my journey began in Afghanistan. I'm grown up in Afghanistan. I have studied law and political science at Kabul University's law school, and I began my career there. I worked as an assistant lecturer at Faculty of Law and Political Science for a year. And also after that, I moved to Germany to continue my studies. I did a Master of Arts, a master's degree in public economics, law and politics. And I later came to the UK to complete another master's degree in international human rights law. And I continued living and working in the UK, and today I work as a campaigns and communications manager at an organization in London focusing on human rights, refugee rights, and social justice issues.
Amazing, Mitra. And what motivated you to become involved in human rights and advocacy work related to Afghanistan?
Thanks, Nazifa. So I've always been outspoken and unapologetic about sharing my views when I was witnessing injustice. Even at school, I was interested in issues of fairness and equality. And I used to watch television programs about human rights, people's experiences, and history, which inspired me to study law and political science. This was quite different from the rest of my family, who are all engineers, and they have not entered the social science world. So I initially wanted to become a journalist to give a voice to those who were silenced or marginalized in society. But later I decided that studying law and political science would allow me to contribute to change in a different way while still advocating for people's rights.
Thank you, Mitra Jan, for sharing this with us. Mitra Jan, of course, what stands out to me is that your commitment to human rights and justice started long before you entered professional life. It shows how personal values and early experiences can shape the direction of someone's career and turn into a lifelong commitment to creating change. How would you describe your connection to Afghanistan today while living abroad?
Thanks, Nazifa, for the question. I always feel connected to Afghanistan through both my work and my daily life. I mean, it's not possible to disconnect because my roots are there. After the takeover, I wouldn't explain all the connections I have with Afghanistan while living abroad, but just briefly. Immediately after the Taliban's takeover, I started working as a reporter at a London-based TV station, and I focused on violations of women's rights and human rights in Afghanistan. I produced lots of reports on women's rights and human rights in Afghanistan since the takeover, and I worked in the role for a year. And after that, I joined Afghan Witness Project. The project focused on verifying human rights violations using open source techniques. In that role, I supported Afghan civil society organizations, women's groups, and media outlets by facilitating training on open source investigations and digital security. The aim was to help preserve the information space in Afghanistan and strengthen the ability of organizations to document abuses safely. And these, of course, documentations and verifications of human rights violations would support accountability mechanisms in Afghanistan. And I was going to say that this work was particularly valuable because we also provided grants to Afghan organizations carrying out projects that used OSINT methods to collect, verify, and preserve evidence of human rights violations. And this, as I said, this would contribute to accountability efforts and mechanisms seeking to hold perpetrators accountable. Today, in my current role, I support refugees and migrants in the UK by campaigning for migrant justice, amplifying the voices of those who are often unheard, and holding government accountable for policies that contribute to a hostile environment. So it's always been some connection or full connection to Afghanistan. But again, I voluntarily support the advocacy for human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. And I participate in panel discussions and events and any campaigns or advocacy efforts that support the plight of women of Afghanistan and raise awareness on the situation of human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan.
Amazing. Mitra John, your work shows that distance does not necessarily mean disconnection, even while being outside Afghanistan, and you continue to stay connected with the realities on the ground through journalism, documentation, and supporting those who work to protect human rights. And it also highlights the importance of preserving stories and evidence because documenting today's realities can help shape accountability and justice in the future. Mitra John, since 2021, how have you seen the situation of Afghan women change through your work and networks?
As we all know, the situation for Afghan women and girls has deteriorated and continued to get worse since the takeover in 2021. It's been 5 years since girls above the grade of 6 are not allowed to go to school. And we all know that since the Taliban takeover, the regime has implemented an extensive system of gender-based discrimination through over 150 laws, policies, and decrees that severely restrict the lives of women and girls. Women have been systematically excluded from education, from employment, political participation, freedom of movement, access to justice, and many aspects of public life. According to legal experts and human rights advocates and Afghan women's rights activists, what is taking place currently in Afghanistan amounts to gender apartheid, which is an institutionalized system of oppression and domination designed to maintain the subordination of one gender group by another. Afghan women and human rights advocates are therefore calling for gender apartheid to be recognized and codified as a crime against humanity and under international law, and especially in the Treaty on Prevention and Punishment of Crimes Against Humanity.
Amazing, Mitra John, thank you so much. And what stands out in your reflection is that the restrictions on Afghan women and girls are not isolated decisions, but part of a broader system that affects every aspect of their lives. and beyond policies and laws, we are talking about real human consequences, lost education, lost opportunities, and generations whose futures are being shaped by these restrictions. This is why documentation, advocacy, and international attention remain so important. And my fifth question from you is, what are the most common stories or concerns you hear from Afghan women you are in contact with?
Thanks, Nazifa. The most common concern I hear, and I'm sure you hear on a daily basis, is the profound impact that Taliban policies are having on every aspect of women's lives. Women have lost access to many of their basic rights, and the impact on mental health is really significant. This is particularly devastating for younger girls who are prevented from attending school beyond grade of 6. These should be some of the most important years of their lives, years when they should be making friends, developing their interests, and thinking about their futures. At that age, I remember myself, I was thinking about what I wanted to become, but girls today, they can't. They don't have the means and the opportunity to think about their future. Therefore, they feel that their hopes and aspirations have been taken away from them, and that's really heartbreaking and that's really sad. They're not deserving of this sort of situation. Women also speak about the loss of access to justice and the absence of mechanisms to protect their rights. The Taliban have shut down all the means for women to raise their voices and to access justice for violations of their rights, domestic violence as well. So they simply want to be heard. Women want to be heard by the international community. They want the world to listen and to take meaningful action. Additionally, many women feel that the current international response is not enough. What is happening in Afghanistan is not only an Afghanistan issue, it has broader implications for human rights globally. As I said earlier, Afghanistan remains the only country in the world where women and girls are systematically banned from secondary and higher education and face restrictions on their employment and their public participation. The Taliban have practically eliminated women from every aspect of the public life. We can't see them anywhere now.
Exactly, Mitra. This reminds us that education is not only about a classroom, it's about hope, identity, confidence, and the ability of young people to imagine and build a future for themselves. And when girls are denied education, they are not only losing lessons and opportunities, they are being deprived of the chance to discover their talents, develop their voices, and participate fully in society. And the impact of this will be felt not only by Afghan women but by the future of Afghanistan as a whole. Mitra John, can you share a specific story while respecting privacy that has deeply affected you?
Of course, there are many inspiring stories that have stayed with all of us for sure. But for me, it's not about a specific story per se, but rather an inspirational experience that has shaped me through my life. Throughout my life, my mother, she has always been my role model. I'm sure mothers are role models for all daughters in Afghanistan. When I think about her resilience, while raising children, working and navigating life through conflict and uncertainty, I so much admire her bravery. I still remember how she and my dad protected us during the first Taliban regime and how determined she was to ensure that we received an education. As you know, we were all. I was very young when I was not even at school when the Taliban came to power in 1996, but my mom tried very hard to for us to get an education. She taught us at home, found ways to send us to underground schools, and carried all these burdens and fears that, as children, we could not fully understand. So, looking back, I realize how much courage that required. Despite the risks and hardships, she never gave up on our future. my future as well. She taught me the importance of humility, patience, resilience, and pursuing my goals and dreams, no matter what the barriers or obstacles are. She still remains my greatest inspiration. In many ways, the story of my mother and many other women reflects the story of course, women of Afghanistan, women who have endured war, injustice, and of course, oppression. They continued to care for their families. They tried to pursue education and work, and they built a better future for the next generation. That's something we cannot deny, and we always need to cherish and admire about them. Their strength is often quiet and unseen. You would agree with me, because they didn't have the means that we have today, but they were still resilient, which is extraordinary. And I think, of course, their resilience and sacrifices deserve greater recognition, because with very limited means, they had this silence kind of fight against illiteracy, against an oppressive regime, and also going through so many wars and suicide bombings without complaining. And I truly admire that.
Thank you for sharing this personal story, Mitra. What stands out to me is that behind many Afghan women who continue to fight for education and rights, there are often stories of other women who carried courage and hope through difficult times. And your mother's story shows that resilience is not always seen on public stages. Sometimes it begins quickly inside families through everyday that shape future generations. And for me, the same, like as my experience and in the stage that I'm today, it's because of my mom. So big respects for moms. And thank you so much again for sharing this with us and with our listeners. But from your perspective, what are the biggest legal or protection challenges Afghan women face when seeking support abroad or through international system?
Thank you for asking this question, because this is a topic that's being argued and being spoken about quite a lot nowadays. And it's a very key and important issue to raise awareness about. Afghan women face significant barriers when seeking protection abroad. Including limited access to safe pathways, restrictive asylum policies, very lengthy processing times, and difficulties providing evidence of gender-based persecution. Many of them also face challenges accessing legal support, family reunion or reunification routes, and protection mechanisms that fully recognize the systematic discrimination and restrictions imposed on women and girls under the Taliban rule. Nowadays, we hear that some European countries are speaking with the Taliban about deportation of Afghan refugees back to Afghanistan. That poses significant risk to those who have fled the Taliban, who have experienced detention and torture, and sending them back will put them at high risk of protection. It will put them at risk of persecution and even death, and that's really dangerous. And among these, they can be women. Therefore, I think it is key to speak about this. It is very important to remove this sort of attempts by the governments, and also prioritize people's protection, not only women, but human rights advocates' protection and their safety from where they have fled. And that's against all the human rights norms and international law and the Refugee Convention.
Mitra John, thank you so much for raising this important issue. For many Afghan women, seeking protection is not simply a matter of crossing a border. It is often a continuation of a struggle for safety, dignity, and basic rights. And when women flee persecution, their experiences and the risks they face need to be fully recognized. And protection system must consider the realities of gender-based persecution and ensure that vulnerable individuals are not returned to situations where they may face further harm. Mitra John, in this part, I want to ask you that from your perspective, what gaps exist in the international response to the situation of Afghan women?
Well, thank you for this question as well, because I think there is this very disconnect between statements of solidarity, condemnations, and concrete action. There has been strong international condemnation of Taliban's treatment of women. We have seen there are processes like the ICC issued the arrest warrant for the leader of Taliban. And also the Chief Justice of the Taliban, and then there are ICJ processes ongoing for Taliban's violation of Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And then we have the investigative mechanism for Afghanistan, the independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan, to collect and preserve evidence of serious human rights violations and international crimes. There are lots of steps taken, which we do appreciate, but there's also a need for action, because I think the support has not been translated into meaningful protection, practical protection for women, safe pathways for their migration, or longer-term support for women of Afghanistan. I know the accountability mechanisms and these processes take quite long, but we need for urgent action and urgent support for women of Afghanistan. Also, there is a need for inclusion of women in decision-making processes, and to ensure that policies and responses are informed by their experiences and priorities rather than developed without their participation. We, the women, have to be in any negotiating table and any decision-making process that affect us. I think the world needs to take concrete action to support women. Issuing statements aren't sufficient.
Mitra John, your points highlights a key challenge, and the world has many statements and mechanisms, but the real test is turning those community commitments into action that change people's realities. And also, if you can tell us, how do you personally hearing difficult or traumatic stories from the women you work with?
Thank you for the question, Nazifa. This is something we all are coping, we all need to take into consideration when we are advocating for the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. Hearing their stories is never easy. It can be emotionally challenging at times, but what keeps me going is the resilience and strength of the women inside Afghanistan. I do try to maintain a healthy lifestyle. I seek support from colleagues and friends, and remind myself that listening, advocating for women's rights are important ways of contributing to change. And I also remind myself that I'm living abroad while those living inside the country are currently suffering under an oppressive regime, and they are still fighting for their rights. And that keeps me going and motivates me to stay healthy, to become their voice abroad, and use the means we have in the West to support them. These means are the freedom of expression and assembly, and they're very powerful. And these are the things that keep me going. But I do believe that it's also important to stay mentally healthy as well and look after ourselves.
Mitra John, your reflection reminds us that behind every human rights advocate, there is also a human being carrying these stories. The courage of Afghan women continues to inspire those who work for change. In this part, I want to ask you, looking at the future, what role do you think Afghan women can play in shaping change despite the current challenges?
Women of Afghanistan play a huge role in shaping their future. despite all the challenges. They have played a very significant role in raising their voices. They have been very resilient. They have been very determined. They have inspired people around the world. Their role is their activism, in spite all the challenges of being, at risk of persecution, detention, and torture, is not unforgettable. They have been, like, honestly, I so much admire their resilience and their determination. They continue to organize under such oppressive regime, and they support each other, and they raise their voices collectively, which is fantastic. And that's something that would definitely have an impact in the situation of women of Afghanistan in future as well, and that will give them the voice. They already have their voices, but more resilience and organizing will give them the voice they really deserve in any decision making that shape their fate and their future in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mitra, again for sharing your experiences, reflections, and the stories of Afghan women with us. And your work reminds us that behind every statistic is a human story, and every voice has the power to create awareness and change. And to our listeners, if you have a story, experience, and perspective you would like to share, we invite you to connect with us through the Women for Women podcast website. Until the next episode, we will continue creating spaces for women's voices, stories, and hopes. Thank you for listening.